Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go all the way back to March 21st, 2019 for Pedalshift Project 158, where we cover training and route planning for bicycle touring beginners. This was part of one of the beginner series that we did here on the pod with Steve Martin. This is, if I recall correctly, the second of the parts. So we've already kind of introduced Steve. If you didn't have a chance to listen back in the day, go back and listen to number 150. As I mentioned in this best of. This was a really good one. A lot of kind of frequently asked questions I tend to get about training and route planning. Hope you enjoy. All right, we are back with the second in the Beginner Series 2019 with Steve Martin. Steve, how are you, and how's everything been going in the lead up to your tour?
I'm doing fantastic. Tour planning and things are going well. Fundraising is great. I've actually already passed halfway mark of my goal, which is amazing because I kind of feel like I've barely tried. So, but I'll take it.
I'm really pleased to hear that, because that's usually the kind of thing that is everything's going great, but the fundraising, I wish we could do more. But to be that far ahead of the game at this point, that's really, really great. And what's the website again? If anybody who's listening to the show wants to kind of throw a few bucks at you for this ride,
it's rideforpd.org or rideforparkinsons.org. Either one of those will work.
Awesome. That is fantastic. So anybody who is interested in supporting Steve's ride and the good cause that it is, first of all, listen to episode number 150 if you're like, who is this guy? And you can get a little bit more information on Steve's background and everything leading up to this ride. This episode, we are going to be tackling two different topics. Number one is training philosophies, and the second one is going to be route planning. So, and these are both upon request from Steve. So, and I think that honestly, these two topics may be in every single beginner series because they're just kind of the classic ones. It's like, how do I get in shape for this? And how do I figure out where I'm going to go? So these all make perfect sense. We'll start off with training philosophies. And I say it that way because I think that there are two and probably three different ways of looking at getting in shape ahead of a ride. And I'm curious, where's your headspace at for training ahead of your ride? And is there anything that you're kind of bringing to the table question wise for all of us, which is a weird way of saying, do you have any questions?
I've got questions. So, actually, a lot of the questions come from the folks coming with us. We're up to about 7 people going, including myself. All from all ranges of ability to ride. One guy has cycled, toured all over the world, so he's fine. Another guy's pretty well fit already, but we got a couple guys who are kind of brand new to the thing. One guy who's a mountain biker but not a road biker who's coming. And from my perspective, I in addition to just trying to lose weight along the way to get in shape for myself in general, I've heard lots of different, like varying levels of advice, I guess, different on the continuum. There's the camp that's like, hey, as long as you can sit on your butt for 6 hours a day, you're good. And then on the other side, there's the people who are like, you got to train and kill yourself and interval training and all this other stuff on the other side of the continuum. So I'm kind of curious from somebody who's done it a lot or advised a lot of people on doing training for touring, like what's your philosophy? Because I kind of don't have one. I'm just kind of riding my bike as much as I can and trying to get in general shape right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the way to approach it is, knowing that there are a bunch of different ways to do it and probably not one really correct way. I think everybody approaches a tour, especially if it's their first one, differently than other people. But I think you nailed the different categories. I sort of categorize the philosophies as the train like hell people. Those are the ones they're like, you've got to be on a trainer all through the winter, and you've got to, you need to have goals, and you need to be able to ride this much by this date, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That. Then on the other side of the spectrum is you can ride your way into touring shape. That is a lot of folks will do that, will literally not sit on a bike for even a second and will hop on a bike at the beginning of a cross-country tour or a longer tour like what you're doing. And then there's other folks who are probably somewhere in the middle. And I think that's that's the ticket of folks who maybe are hoping to train like hell, but end up not necessarily getting to that point.
Right.
And they do some amount of training, but they're somewhere in between sitting on the couch until they're ready to roll, and the folks who are kind of hitting the trainer every day, even though there's a foot of snow out on the ground, which is probably somewhere around what the weather has been like for both of us in these last couple of months. So, I mean, I think that when it comes to training philosophies, you have to kind of go with, all right, where are you physically right now, and where do you need to be by the time you start rolling? For a lot of folks who are going to be doing really, truly long tours, I think that they can somewhat get away with the whole riding into your touring shape type of thing. If your tour is only going to be a week or two or something on the shorter side of things, and it's going to be going through some really rugged terrain, I think you need to be more towards the train like hell kind of spectrum. You've got to be ready. If you're going to be coming right off the couch and tackling the Continental Divide, how many times are you crossing it? Quite a few, aren't you?
Technically, the Divide, I think, twice, but we're going over, I think, 4 mountain passes.
So you need to be in some kind of shape. And I think that from the perspective of your tour, I think hill work is more important than time in the saddle than anything else, because I think that those are the challenges that are going to be the unique barriers to what is going to be considered a successful tour on your part. Do you happen to have hills in and around the Fort Collins area? Just out of curiosity.
Oh yeah, we're right up against the fort, the mountains, so we're good.
That was me trying to pull a funny there, and it kind of fell a little flat. But anyways, yes. The idea is that I think that for your training rides, you're already at elevation. I think being in a headspace where you can kind of not have to worry about elevation and not be, I don't know, intimidated by the length of a long climb or anything along those lines. Those are the types of things that I think that you want to do. But I think you also want to look at this and take a cue from folks who do long distance running marathon trainers. When they train, especially first timers or folks who aren't constantly doing or aren't in constant running shape, they never do a full marathon as a part of their training for a marathon. So what do? They go out for long runs and they get those runs to become progressively longer, but there's a pattern to how they approach the training. And then at the same time, as they get up to those longer miles, the longest run they'll do is maybe a 19 or a 20-mile run for the ultimate goal. And then that's usually at least a full week before their tour. And then there's a taper, because there's tons of really good science on the efficacy of training really hard, but then making sure that you give your body a little bit of a sense of rest ahead of the big tour, the big run, whatever. So no matter what your sort of, I don't know, motivation is for how hard you want to be in training mode, I would really, really recommend that you build up to it slowly over time. And you've got pretty much all summer, if I recall correctly, because you're starting in September. So you've got a lot of time to slowly build up those miles to really get your endurance built up. But then I would definitely recommend that you take a solid week and maybe even a touch more where you're doing just sort of real chill rides. Maybe the kind of riding that you're going to be doing in the spring is going to be very similar to what you're going to be doing in the week or two leading up to the kickoff of the ride, because you're not going to lose all of the benefits of the training that you did all through the summer, and your body's going to have a chance to kind of be at tip-top shape. It gives it I wish I understood why tapers work so well, but it's pretty established in the sports science world that that's a really good thing. The other thing is nutrition and watching what you eat and making sure that you're giving your body the right kind of fuel for you. And that's going to vary from person to person. I will use me as an example. If I eat even the smallest amount of sugar when I'm off the bike, I gain a ton of weight. So I've largely eliminated sugar from my diet. My girlfriend, on the other hand, sugar is the fourth food group. So, and she's, about 110 pounds or something like that. So
yeah, you have perfectly described my wife and I.
Exactly. Right. So, those are the types of things that are very tailored to what your eating style is. And I think that comes to the last piece. And I think that it's especially true for you with what you're dealing with and what you're kind of going through with this ride, is to know your body. and to make sure that you're listening to it through the training. And if something doesn't feel right, you should stop doing it, So if, hitting a particular pass in your training is always, causing you to bonk, well, maybe you're attacking it a little too hard. Maybe you're not hydrated enough. You don't have enough electrolytes in you. Make sure that you're keeping track of what you're doing before, so that if something does go awry, you can kind of get a sense of, all right, what was the cause of this? And I think that that's going to serve you pretty well. That's sort of, in a nutshell, my thought process on training. And you can also ask me, how often do I follow my own words? Very rarely. Right now through the winter, I thought, oh, great, I'll go on a tour and I won't have to worry about eating well. Well, as a result, even though I went on that nice little 3-day tour, I probably ate as if I was touring all winter. So I put on more weight this winter than I would have ordinarily liked. So for my spring tour, which I'm kind of in the initial planning stages for, I've got to really focus on kind of dropping the weight, especially if I'm going to be going through hillier areas, because whatever weight you've got on you that you're carrying on the bike, it's the same as if it's in a pannier as well. So if you're intending to slim down some, you've got to make sure that you've got that planning. And frankly, I kind of blew it this winter. I think I drank too many good chocolate stouts.
Yeah, I think I hear a lot of people, especially in the road biking community, they get very concerned about carbon fiber everything. So it's like 1 ounce, it's like the end of the road type of thing. And I'm kind of the opinion of, I would rather the best place to remove weight from the bike is the cyclist themselves. So I'm trying to remove as much weight from myself as possible along the way. One thing I'm curious about, I wonder if you've ever used any of these apps that for training, like on your phone apps. If you have any, what are the names of those?
I have, and I'm are you a member of Strava? I have Strava on my phone. I don't tend to use that very much. I mean, that is much more popular in the racing community and kind of the road biking community that you just referenced. I tend to use an app called Ride with GPS, which I feel like straddles a little bit of other cycling varieties a little bit more. And I don't know if I would say I use it so much in the training perspective, although I will say it is nice when I will tend to go off on rando rides, like where I'm just sort of like, I don't know where I'm going to go. I'm just going to keep following bike lanes and paths and things like that. And whenever I get tired about halfway, I'll turn around and come back. And it's always nice to know what was the distance that I went. And I'm always surprised what speed I was going as well. I don't ever kind of add all these things up and say, oh, great, I'm going to chart this and keep track of that. Even though I'm nominally into data, for whatever reason, the data of bicycling never really grabs me so much, which is unusual because I get into data-oriented analysis for all sorts of other types of things. So, I think that it can be helpful, but it also can be one of those types of things where you're doing it for the sake of doing it, and it's taking away maybe a little bit of the joy. But for a lot of people, it's their ability to be able to compare themselves to others, to be able to kind of have that little bit of competition going on, because I know that in different, like for instance, the Strava groups or things like that. So if the folks that you're going to be riding with, maybe you create a Strava group so that you have some accountability amongst each other. That's another possible way that you can kind of pre-create the community of riders. And when you see that your buddy who is maybe you're kind of like, oh, that guy's in a little bit better shape than me at this point, and he's already off doing these passes and I haven't done that, or we did a similar ride, and it's a good way of kind of showing that comparison. But you want to be careful about that too, because when all is said and done, everybody rides their own ride. And although you're going to be cycling as a group, I'm not sure if you're all going to necessarily be cycling together. And that gets more into the group dynamic stuff that we'll be talking about on a future episode. But, it's stuff to keep in mind as part of the training, because, the tour doesn't just begin from your first day. It really begins once everybody sort of agrees that they're going to be doing a tour with you. So in some ways, the training regimen of training together, even if you're not cycling together, does make some sense as well.
So if I was going to sum up what you were talking about as far as like the philosophies and stuff, it sounds like get on your bike as much as you can, and ride lots of hills if you're going to be riding hills. What else am I missing?
I think that if you are concerned about the amount of time that you're on the bike, and I think maybe this is something worth chatting, because you had mentioned that one in your recitation of the philosophies that there's a group of folks that say all you need to do is be ready to be in the saddle for 6 hours a day. I think there's a lot to be said about that. To me, I have never really considered bicycle touring to be a particularly athletically, physically demanding type of recreation, sport, whatever we want to call it. I think it's a pretty mental type of activity. And there's a lot to be said about, we tend to do things in hour to 2 hour chunks in our lives. And there's a lot of different interesting studies about the psychology of adult education, that if you do something for more than 90 minutes and don't change gears, don't give a break, then you're losing your audience. I think that speaks, at least in an analogous way, to how our minds handle lengthy periods of time where we're doing just the same thing, like say, bicycle touring. So I think that getting used to being in the saddle for extended periods of time beyond what you've ever done before, if your longest bike ride has been, a day ride and it's, 3 hours, say, well, you are going to want to be able to kind of get mentally used to going from 3 hours to 4 hours to 5 hours and beyond, depending on how long you think those days are going to be mileage wise. So in some ways, and this gets a little bit to our route planning segment, which we'll be doing next, knowing what each day is effectively going to look like, or at least having a good idea of what is your longest day going to be, and knowing how long you're going to have to be in the saddle, knowing that there are a host of factors that will shrink or expand how much time you're going to have to be in there. Don't forget that sometimes you're going to get a flat, or folks you're going to be riding with are going to get a flat, or things are going to intervene and your day may end up becoming longer. So that's sort of a really roundabout way of saying you do want to be ready for the mental aspect of long days, because it's different than just sort of hopping on your bike and going to get groceries, like I do through so much of my bicycling on the day-to-day level. But I think also once you get attuned to that, which comes relatively quickly, you don't have to worry about it. But I do know that it's a big barrier to entry for a lot of folks who are involved in bicycle touring, that it starts to weigh on their mind, and then it starts to manifest, I think, itself in physical ways, almost always in the saddle, it seems like. So there are folks who will start bicycle touring and then they'll be like, I'm getting numb in my sits bones, or I'm getting numb in my hands, or whatever. And there's definitely a physical component to it, but I do think that the mental part of it is the thing that starts to feed it. So getting used to being in the saddle for a long period of time can kind of forestall a lot of this. Yeah,
I like how you frame that as far as it being a heavily mental thing, because like when I talk to like my parents or whatever about this tour, the immediate thought that comes to their mind is that's a lot of time. Like this sounds like this massive physical undertaking. But I think I personally forget about the fact that it is a very mental thing.
It is. And I think also knowing, how do you handle being in your own head for a long period of time? Are you the type of person that needs constant stimulation? Do you need when you're working, do you play music? Do you have podcasts in the background? Do you have the TV on? If you're working in an office type of an environment, or in any kind of environment like that, are you constantly getting up to interact with people? All of those types of things will help inform what's sort of the best way for you to approach the mental aspect of the ride. For me, I tend to be considered a little bit more of an extrovert, so I get my energy from interacting with people, except when it comes to bicycling. I'm a super huge introvert when it comes to cycling, but I also like to have my mind be pretty active beyond just what's kind of going on around me. So I'm paying 100% attention to what's going on around me. I know what the traffic is if I'm on a road, but I've also got music, or I've got something else that sort of helps to engage my little, in yoga, we call it the monkey brain or the monkey mind. It's like having something there to sort of keep it at bay at the same time. That actually helps me focus a little bit more. If I was forced to do a bicycle tour with absolutely nothing going on other than the sounds of the ride itself, I would lose my mind and it would be really bad. I'd like to do it for short periods of time because I do like to interact with the nature of what's around me. But at the same time, if I had to do a ride on the C&O, which is just here in my backyard, it's 184.5 miles. If I had to do that without any kind of music or podcast or something like that, I probably would quit by Harper's Ferry, which is about a day ride from here. So, know those things about yourself and cater to that, but also, it's the same thing as sort of like if you were told to eat the same thing for a week, you would get sick of that thing by the end of the week. So make sure that you've got the types of things that are going to keep your mind at bay. Give yourself that variety as well. And like I said, this changes for different people. So, you don't necessarily want to bring music and podcasts along with you. That works for me. I like using earbuds. I know that's a huge, that's a bit of a controversial thing for a lot of folks. I tend to find that it drowns out. It helps to block the traffic noise a little bit, but I don't ever have the volume so high that I don't know that if there's a car behind me or obviously in front of me. But there are lots of folks who feel very differently. That's what training is for also, is that you will start to find those things that give you the comfort to continue to ride and will be the right amount of, I'll use the word distraction, even though that's probably not a good thing to have, but the thing that will kind of make your brain a well-oiled machine as you spin away, for, 4, 5, 6,
right,
7, 8 hours a day. Just, it depends on how long you're going to be cycling. Oh, and breaks too. That's another element to it. And that kind of also goes into the training element. Are you good taking lots of small breaks? Are you good taking 1 or 2 big breaks? You're going to learn that through your training as well. So that's the other thing, is that these are many ways to learn more about your body and how it reacts to the physical, but not insanely physical aspects of bike touring.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
So I think that sort of covers it in a bit of a nutshell. I mean, and we can definitely talk about more about training, because that's something that you're going to be dealing with for, well, really the better part of the next 5 months at least. So we can definitely come back to this
right.
as things go along. We're going to take a quick break and talk about Hobbuck Dyneema wallets. You know Hobbuck if you've been listening to the pod lately. It's a Chicago-based maker of minimal ultralight wallets made out of super strong Dyneema composite fabric. For years, I have struggled with my George Costanza wallet on tour. You know the type. Way too many cards, receipts from who knows when, about 4 inches thick. That's the one. I put it in my pockets and I feel it with every single pedal. Put it in my handlebar bag. I'm always worried I'll forget it when I leave the bike and return to find it stolen. Then I tried a Hobbuck, and it's my bike touring wallet. I just slip in a credit card, my ID, cash, maybe some Pedalshift stickers, and it is awesome. It's so light and it's so low profile, it fits in the zipper pocket in my touring pants. But it's so light and airy, I didn't think about it once during the entire Florida tour, and I always knew where it was. No more ugly plastic bags and rubber bands for me. I know I'll always have the cash for those unexpected cash-only places on tour. Hey, check it all out for yourself at hobbuck.camp. Use the code Pedalshift and get 10% off your order. Big thanks to Hobbuck Dyneema Wallets for sponsoring the show. But I think now is a good time to turn our attention to route planning, depending on what part of the country you're from. And I think that it sounds like you've got the route that you've got figured out is largely sketched out, but there are elements that you've got choices and you're trying to figure out what choices to make. Is that a good encapsulation of where you're at?
Yeah, like you said, it's roughly sketched out. I know the beginning point and the end point and kind of a couple spots in the middle, but it's really, the question for me comes down to which roads, like how do you pick which roads to take, distance per day versus elevation change. I'm not sure. I tend to overanalyze things a lot of times, so I've got the feeling that I'm doing that with this, like the training thing. Maybe I'm tracking too many things or something, and maybe I just need to be a bit more zen about it. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that it's wrong to be mindful of these things because, if you've got a, light rolling hills kind of a day, well, you're going to be able to bang out a lot more miles than if your entire day is this, 40-mile, 10% grade ascent. I mean, I don't even know if that exists, but, in any event, being mindful of what your terrain is going to be vis-a-vis what your energy output is going to be and what your speed is going to be. You've got to be at least somewhat mindful of that. And I think that when it comes to route planning, one of the great ways to approach it is to just say, I don't need to invent the first route through these areas at all, because this is a huge cycling area, and chances are where I want to go has not only been done, but it's probably been done several times before, and people have written journals about it. So one of my first places that I like to go to is I'll check out whether or not this is an established route in the first place. So if I'm looking at doing an area around the coasts or something like that, any place where it's sort of like, well, there's really only kind of one road, chances are that if it's in the States, the Adventure Cycling Association has already mapped this out, and they've got maps and they've got a suggested itinerary and all of that. And sometimes that can be really helpful. So I don't know if that's the case. If your route has any kind of an overlap with any established routes, and it doesn't have to just be the ACA. Very often the states individually will have their own bicycle routes, and that can be really helpful as well. So checking out the State Department of Transportation is often a very helpful thing as well. So that doesn't always give you all the answers. And that's when you get into okay, I'm going to have to at least build this route myself, at least partially. And when it comes to that, I look at probably 3 different categories of things. And the first thing that I look at is online journals and Cycle Blaze, Crazy Guy on a Bike, individual blogs, any of those folks out there that have existing resources where you go to the website and you just kind of tap in maybe one of the cities that you're going to be going through, or the state, any kind of a way to find those routes narrowed down, and maybe you'll be able to kind of pick and choose from a few of them, especially if the route that you're thinking of has an already predetermined name. If you've already figured out, oh, well, this is sort of the XYZ route of Colorado, well, then you might be able to find that by name. That can be really, really helpful for 2 reasons. Number one is this is a person or a group that has done the route that you're looking at, or at least a piece of it, and they've already tested it out in terms of the length that they went that day, how many days. They've done a little bit of the work for you by riding it ahead of you and talking about it. You can also learn from some of their mistakes, maybe. And sometimes you can read some of these journals, and they will say, I was intending to do 70 miles this day, and that was a stupid idea. And so, you can learn from those journals and their mistakes, and that can be super helpful as well. But that's a good starting point, because then you can say, oh, okay, here is an itinerary that was already done. I can see where there were some mistakes made. I can see how weather or mechanicals impacted. It's a story, but it's a single data point. So what you want to do is try to collect a bunch of those if they exist. Another source of data that I find to be really, really helpful is Ride with GPS or Strava heat maps.
Okay.
And those can be very helpful, especially the latter one. If you're looking for a way to find a route where you've got a couple of different options, perhaps, and then you're not sure, I don't know which road is better. A Strava heat map is going to show you where most of the cyclists are going. And so that sometimes will answer the question for you as well. Ride with GPS will do that, although I don't think they have kind of a heat map function. You can do the same thing that you do for Cycle Blaze or any of the other online journals. Throw in some cities and within 50 miles of X, and then all of a sudden you can kind of see the maps. And the nice thing is often those will come with turn-by-turn directions, and it can push your route making to the next level, and you can use that app for the actual routing that you want to do. If you pay for there's like a mid-tier for Ride with GPS, you can actually draw the maps yourself in the planning stage and then use those for turn-by-turn Or you can export the GPX data if you happen to use a Garmin or something along those lines. If you're a paper maps kind of person, well, it can still be helpful because then you can kind of match it to your paper map and make your itinerary, your turn by turn kind of a thing from that. The last thing that I think can be really, really, really helpful, and this was particularly true for me on this last trip in Florida, was using Google Street View to see what the roads are like. So often I look at maps and I go, well, this looks like a low traveled route. This looks great. And then I'll look on Google Street View and I will see that there is no shoulder. And as I kind of click along, I'll see that it's 60 miles per hour. Well, that at least gives you some information right there.
Now
but
you know why it's a low traveled route, right?
Exactly. But but the one thing that I'll say is that there was a road, and I literally, before you and I started chatting this afternoon, I was doing some editing of the Florida video, and one of the roads that turned out to end up being my favorite road of all. It was great, even though it was a 60 mile per hour road, and it had about a 2-inch shoulder, if you could even call that a shoulder. I mean, it was sort of like the weight paint was like kind of touching the grass, but there was this little mini strip of asphalt that they didn't quite get to. The reason why it still was a great cycling road and was used by a lot of folks in Florida for cycling is it's tremendously great asphalt, and it's super low trafficked because it rides parallel with one of the main thoroughfares through Central Florida that happens to be an interstate, and then there's another state route that was parallel with that as well. So this was a tertiary road, and even though it was really high speed, cyclists love it because there were very few cars that were on it. So how do you kind of get all this information? You cobble it all together, basically. It's like, okay, well, Street View can give me an idea of what this all looks like. What's the condition of the road? When were these images taken? Because Google gives you all that data. But then you can check out Strava heat maps. You can see what other online journals are looking like, and then sort of piece this together like a gigantic puzzle. Very often, I don't have to go through all of these things to get a good picture of what the route that I'm building looks like or would ride like. But the Google Street View for me, and I think I talked about this on the last podcast, is so helpful to visualize a complicated scenario where maybe you're going through a city and, there's a turn right, turn left, turn right, turn left kind of a scenario. I don't think that's going to be something that you're going to have to deal with so much. But if there's any element to your ride where you're like, oh, this will get a little complicated in here as we go through this area, Google Street View can be a really helpful piece of the puzzle to get rid of some of the question marks as to how you're going to make all of this happen. So that's sort of in a nutshell how I approach route planning, but I'm curious where you're at right now, and have you used any of these tools? Where are you sort of at this point?
Well, I'm happy to hear that I think I've been doing it the right way. So
always a bonus, right?
Right. So as I said, the plan is to start at the New Mexico border and go straight north up to the Wyoming border. And so I wasn't able to find any well-worn biking paths in the southern part of Colorado in that area. It's most of the transcontinental trail goes kind of across Colorado hits the mountains, and it kind of goes north into Wyoming. And so what I did a lot of Street View, like clicking and clicking for hours. It seems like making sure that there's like plenty of shoulder and looked like it was not too busy. I'm really interested to look at the Strava heat maps. I didn't even know that was an option. I did come across the Colorado Department of Transportation has a map that shows like average. I think I heard you mention this. There was one of these in for your Florida trip as well.
That's right. And it was really helpful.
Yeah, to see it'll list the width of the shoulders on the roads and how many cars per hour and how many trucks per hour, that kind of stuff. That's been helpful. But what I decided to do, I was originally planning to go up over through Leadville and over the mountains that way. But then the more I started looking at it, I finally broke down and bought the Colorado section of the Transamerica Trail from Adventure Cycling Association. And I was looking at it, and I can just with like 10 more miles, we can pop over to Hartselle, Colorado, where if anybody's familiar with the area. And from Hartzell all the way to the border, we're basically following the Transamerica Trail, which is really, like you said, lots of people expect bikes along those routes a little bit more than others, and it's well traveled already.
I think that that's a really good way to approach it because, and what you said was key. Folks are used to seeing cyclists on these well-trodden routes, and there's nothing better than that because, again, I'll go back to my Florida example and throw one more thing in there, one more little element of information gathering. There is a local cycling club on the Space Coast of Florida, and they do an annual ride every year and went on this one crazy fast road. But since that was part of their route and they regularly ride it, I knew that a local cycling group wouldn't steer me wrong. And because local cycling groups use that road a lot, the folks who drive on it, who presumably are driving on it only because they have to. Maybe they've got property on that road or there's some reason why they're on that road. Man, they give you a ton of wide berths. So
that's good.
I think that and it's sort of the same idea as the Strava heat map. It's just sort of like, maybe it's a little more old school. Checking out to see and simply Googling each of those towns that you're going to be going through. Is there a cycling group in each of those towns? And maybe you can kind of reach out and say, hey, what's a good route? That can be a really helpful piece of information as well. But, the one thing about an ACA route is not only is it a well-trodden path, they've ridden it a bunch of times themselves. The towns are used to catering towards cyclists. So you've got a lot of different resources that are already there. And like I said, you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel. I feel like that's a good bike joke in some ways. When you create these routes, and if it doesn't cause you to have to go too far out of your way, I don't think there's anything wrong with traveling on a route where that the cycling infrastructure is there. And even if the cycling infrastructure is a little bit poor, at least folks are used to seeing cyclists on there. I think that that's kind of the no-brainer, at least for that section.
Yeah, especially for the first tour that I'll be taking and planning and everything, to use the brain power of the rest of the world figured out for me is nice.
At some point in the world, there had never been any bike tours and people had to be the first to do whatever. And, that's good and all, but I have to be honest, it's kind of nice to be, the 8 millionth person to be riding a bicycle through some town, because you know what? It's already been done before and it's cool. Unless that's something that really turns your crank about being the first to do something. I think it's great to have the comfort of knowing that this isn't going to be an oddball occurrence for a driver to see a bicycle on the road, because that can really make a lot of difference in terms of your comfort level when you're riding along those roads. How
do you pick where to stop for the night, like when you're planning a route?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It will frankly depend on the spacing for the day prior and the day after. So what I typically will do if I have a lot of choices is I'll create kind of a short, medium, and long day for each of the days, knowing that that's going to impact what the next day was. So the California coast is a really good example near Big Sur. There's a couple of options where you can just do this crazy long day, but you're blowing through Big Sur. And it's sort of like, well, I kind of like to stay in Big Sur. And then all of a sudden that creates the situation that it's a bit of a shorter day for you, and the next day would be really, really long, or you could do 2 kind of short days. So what do? I end up doing multiple short days to kind of get through that section, knowing full well that makes the most sense. I want to stay in Big Sur. I want to be able to enjoy the vistas. I don't want to kill myself going through those really crazy hills, really enjoy the vistas and not punish myself. But, you could be at a state where let's talk about like a longer tour. Maybe this probably isn't super applicable to you,
sure.
But let's say you've got a flight and you have got 15 days left and you've got about like 17 days worth of riding to do. You're gonna have to throw a century in there. Probably you're gonna have to do 2 days worth of riding or a day and a half worth of riding in a day, and maybe get 3 days of riding in 2 days, and boom, you do a couple of those and you're kind of made up. So I think that when it comes to where are you going to stay, it's going to be, what's the spacing like? What are your lodging needs and what are your lodging preferences? So if you're camping and it's no problem and you don't have too many issues with camping, I suspect that you're going to be going through a lot of Forest Service land and you can do dispersed camping. No problem.
Yeah.
But if you're going to be in hotels every night and it's like, well, it's got to be this town or that town, that's going to be kind of a little bit more of a limiting factor. So I guess the answer is my good lawyerly answer. It depends.
Okay. Yeah. My goal is to, it's kind of worked out this way. The goal is going to be to camp every other night and have some place to stay the other odd nights.
I think that's a really good way to do it, especially because for your first tour, especially if camping is not sort of the thing that really gets you going, it's more of a means to an end, then I would say that that's a really good way to do it. When I first started doing bicycle touring, my biggest thing was I loved camping. I just didn't get out to go camping very often. And so when I threw this bicycle touring thing together, I was like, oh, cool. I can camp every night. Sweet. I'm going to do that. So, that's because I really like camping. Now, somebody else, I met a bunch of people who that is the furthest thing from their minds. And the whole idea of getting on a bike for a bike tour is the bicycling component and only the bicycling component. And they would rather stay at a bed and breakfast or a hotel every single night. And that's what gets them going. I think that all works just great. I had never done that before until this Florida trip. And you know what? It was pretty darn enjoyable. I enjoyed the heck out of it. So I think doing that mix is probably pretty good. And that might also allow you to vary how much you're going to be able, or how much you're going to need to carry. Because if you're going to be doing a hotel night, or staying with friends or warm showers or whatever, chances are you're going to have a chance to do laundry at those stops. So if you have a chance to do laundry every other night, well, maybe you don't have to carry as much stuff.
That's a good point.
There's a lot of nice things that are a consequence of your lodging choices and how you approach things. Knowing full well that, maybe you do a harder day on the day that you're going to end up sleeping in a real bed someplace. That's another possibility as well. I know when I did the Pacific Coast back in 2014, there was one day where, well, frankly, we were trying to lose this one guy. So this one group, there were two guys and me and this one guy that was just, oh my God, we just could, I particularly did not want anything to do with that guy ever again. And so I knew that if we did a full 70 miles to get to, I think it was Lompoc, California, no problem. That guy would be in the dust and I would never have to run into him again. And it was hot and it was crazy and it wasn't part of my original plan. But you know what? I did it. And at the end of that, I ended up in a hotel because that was my sort of reward for pushing through all of that. Hopefully that will not be an issue for you because you're going to be traveling in a different way. But the idea is that at the end of that longer day, having an actual hotel and there were restaurants and, I didn't have to kind of pull out my propane stove and everything to make dinner. I went to a Chinese buffet. So, right. Just these little things that kind of add up. And, as your route gets more, I don't want to say finalized because these things are never truly, truly final in some ways. You can kind of make some of those strategic decisions, especially if the camping is a little bit more flexible for you. But, obviously those nights where it's, whether it's a reservation or it's a friend or it's a warm showers or something like that, you have to commit a little bit more to those than you do necessarily to the camping scenarios. So that will sort of shape how your days go as well.
Yeah, that all sounds great. And, I think I'll keep tweaking and researching probably up until the day before we leave.
Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.